The journey to genuine humility begins with an uncomfortable truth. We live in a world where ego is celebrated and humility is mistaken for weakness. Today, let us unravel the mask of ego and embark on a path toward true strength and peace, the path of humility. The illusion of superiority. Ego whispers the sweetest lies, telling you that you are above others, that your worth is defined by applause and accolades. But what happens when the applause fades, when the crowd disperses? The illusion of superiority crumbles, leaving a hollow void. True greatness begins when you abandon the need to compare. Ego as the enemy of growth. Ego convinces you that you already know enough, that you are already enough. It blinds you to the wisdom of others and shields you from constructive criticism. Without humility, you close the door to growth, for only the humble are open to learning and evolving. The weight of pride. Carrying ego is like walking with a heavy stone upon your shoulders. It burdens you with the constant need for validation, the fear of failure, and the unwillingness to admit mistakes. True humility lightens the load, for it does not seek to impress but to improve. The courage to be vulnerable. Humility is not timidity. It is the courage to admit that you do not have all the answers, the strength to confess your flaws. When you embrace vulnerability, you create space for genuine connections, for others to see your true self without the armor of ego. Releasing the need for control. Ego thrives on control, on the illusion that you can dictate the world around you. Humility, however, understands the limits of human power. It teaches you to focus on what you can control, your actions, your thoughts, and your responses, and to let go of the rest, recognizing the source of true value. Ego measures worth by external achievements. Humility, in contrast, understands that true value lies within. It is not what you achieve, but who you are when no one is watching that defines your character. Humility turns the focus inward and asks, are you aligned with your principles? The wisdom of listening. Ego seeks to speak, to dominate the conversation. Humility listens. It recognizes that every person, no matter their status, holds a piece of wisdom that you do not. When you silence your ego, you open yourself to a wealth of perspectives that can enrich your understanding. The power of gratitude. Ego demands more, always dissatisfied with what is. Humility practices gratitude, finding joy in the present and appreciation for the blessings in your life. Gratitude dismantles ego's insatiable hunger and replaces it with a profound sense of contentment. The art of service. Ego focuses on self-promotion, on climbing higher than others. Humility seeks to lift others, to serve without expecting recognition. In serving others, you free yourself from the ego's chains and discover a deeper sense of purpose and fulfillment. The mirror of self-awareness. Humility requires self-awareness, the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about yourself. It is only when you see your flaws clearly that you can begin to address them. Self-awareness is the foundation upon which humility is built. The peace of humility. Ego is restless, always striving, always unsatisfied. Humility brings peace. It quiets the mind, allowing you to focus on what truly matters. With humility, you can face life's trials with grace, unshaken by success or failure, for your worth is no longer tied to external outcomes. Conclusion. Unmasking your ego is not an easy journey, but it is a necessary one. Genuine humility is not a destination, but a way of life, a daily practice of setting aside pride and embracing authenticity. In humility, you will find strength, in vulnerability, courage, and in letting go of ego, true freedom. Let us walk this path together. Introduction. The path to genuine humility is not for the faint of heart. It demands that we confront the most stubborn adversary we will ever face, our own ego. Ego is a master of disguise, cloaking itself in pride, superiority, and an unyielding need for recognition. It is the voice that whispers you are the center of the world, that your worth is measured by applause and the fleeting approval of others. But what if I told you that this voice is a liar, that in clinging to ego you are not strengthened but shackled? True strength lies in humility. It is not weakness but the quiet confidence that comes from understanding your place in the grand order of life. Humility demands introspection, courage, and discipline. It is the gateway to inner peace and unshakable resilience. Today we will embark on a journey together, peeling back the layers of ego to reveal the true self beneath, a self not tethered to the judgment of others, but anchored in virtue and wisdom. The time to unmask your ego is now. The illusion of superiority. Ego thrives on the belief that we are above others, that our successes, talents, or possessions somehow elevate us beyond the common lot of humanity. It feeds on comparisons, creating a false hierarchy where we place ourselves at the summit. But consider this. What is the source of this need to feel superior? Is it not a reflection of insecurity, of an inner emptiness we seek to fill with external validation? The illusion of superiority is a seductive trap. It offers a fleeting sense of power, but it is hollow. Imagine a mountain made of sand, high and imposing at first glance, but incapable of withstanding the winds of change. Such is the life built on ego. When your self-worth depends on being better than others, you are constantly at risk of losing it. A new rival, a minor failure, or even time itself will erode your sense of superiority, leaving you vulnerable and exposed. True humility begins with the recognition of this illusion. It is the understanding that no matter how skilled, wealthy, or accomplished you may be, you are still bound by the same fundamental truths as everyone else. You are human, subject to the whims of fate, to the inevitability of aging, and to the finality of death. These truths level all distinctions and reveal the folly of ego's claims. Yet humility is not about diminishing yourself. It is not self-abasement or a denial of your own worth. Rather, it is a clear-eyed view of your place in the world. It is the strength to acknowledge that your talents and achievements are gifts, to be used not for self-glorification but for the greater good. Humility also frees you from the exhausting need to compete. When you no longer measure your worth against others, you are liberated to pursue your own path, to strive for excellence without the weight of comparison. In this freedom you will find peace. You will no longer fear the success of others or be consumed by envy, for their journey does not diminish your own. To unmask your ego, begin by examining your thoughts and actions. Ask yourself, is this driven by a need to feel superior? If the answer is yes, pause and reflect. Shift your focus from comparison to contribution. Seek not to rise above others, but to rise above the illusions that ego creates. True greatness lies not in standing on the shoulders of others, but in lifting them alongside you. Ego as the enemy of growth. Ego is a silent saboteur, the unseen force that undermines your potential while convincing you of your infallibility. It tells you that you already know enough, that you are already enough, that there is no need to question, learn, or change. In this way, ego is the enemy of growth, the barrier that stands between you and your highest self. Consider the mindset of a person consumed by ego. They view life as a stage and themselves as the star performer. Their actions are dictated by the need to maintain this image of perfection and authority. To admit ignorance or failure would shatter this facade, and so they avoid vulnerability at all costs. But in doing so, they close the door to wisdom. For how can one learn when they believe they have nothing left to learn? Imagine a garden where nothing new is planted because the gardener believes it is already perfect. Over time, the soil depletes, the plants wither, and the garden loses its vitality. Such is the life ruled by ego, a life where growth ceases, because the illusion of perfection has taken root. To overcome this, you must cultivate the humility to see yourself as a perpetual student of life. Understand that every person you meet, every challenge you face, and every mistake you make is a lesson waiting to be learned. Wisdom does not come to those who seek to prove themselves, but to those who seek to improve themselves. This requires courage, for growth often begins with discomfort. It means confronting truths about yourself that you may prefer to ignore, admitting where you have fallen short, and opening yourself to feedback that may sting your pride. But remember, this discomfort is temporary, while the rewards of growth are enduring. Humility also fosters a mindset of collaboration rather than competition. When you set aside your ego, you create space to learn from others, to value their perspectives and experiences. You become not just a seeker of knowledge, but a contributor to the collective wisdom of those around you. Ask yourself this: when was the last time you truly listened, not to respond, but to understand? When was the last time you admitted you were wrong, not out of obligation, but out of a genuine desire to grow? These moments, though humbling, are the seeds of transformation. To unmask your ego and embrace growth, adopt the mindset of a craftsman, one who is never satisfied with their current level of skill, but constantly seeks refinement. View life as a workshop where every experience is an opportunity to hone your character, to chisel away at the rough edges of ego, and to reveal the masterpiece within. Growth is not a destination, but a lifelong process, and humility is the key that unlocks its door. The weight of pride. Pride is often mistaken for strength, yet it is a weight that drags us down, a burden carried by those unwilling to let go of their ego. It binds us to a relentless cycle of validation, seeking, a constant striving to appear flawless, superior, or untouchable. In its grip, we sacrifice growth, peace, and authenticity for the fleeting satisfaction of appearing invulnerable. Imagine pride as a chain forged by ego, each link representing your refusal to admit a mistake, to ask for help, or to acknowledge your limitations. Over time, this chain grows heavier, and though it burdens you, you hold onto it out of fear. Fear of being seen as weak, fear of losing status, and fear of letting go of the image you have created. But ask yourself, is it not this very chain that holds you back? Pride whispers that to admit fault is to diminish yourself, yet the opposite is true. To admit fault is to display courage, to embrace humility, and to step into the light of truth. There is no shame in falling short, only in refusing to rise again. Pride, however, resists this wisdom. It prefers the illusion of perfection to the reality of progress, for progress requires vulnerability, and vulnerability is anathema to pride. Consider the toll that pride takes on relationships. It creates barriers where there should be bridges, preventing open communication and genuine connection. Pride resents criticism, even when it is constructive, and interprets disagreement as an attack. It is a lonely fortress built to protect the ego, but at the cost of isolating the self. Humility, by contrast, tears down these walls. It invites dialogue, fosters understanding, and nurtures bonds that pride would sever. The weight of pride is also evident in how it stifles personal development. When you are consumed by pride, you are unwilling to acknowledge areas where you need to grow. You dismiss opportunities for learning, seeing them as threats to your self-image. Yet growth demands that you lay down this burden. It requires the freedom to fail, the openness to learn, and the willingness to be wrong. To free yourself from the weight of pride, begin by recognizing it for what it is, a defense mechanism born of fear. Pride is not confidence, it is insecurity wrapped in the guise of strength. True confidence comes not from inflating your ego, but from aligning your actions with your principles. It is the quiet assurance that you are doing your best, regardless of how others perceive you. Next, practice the discipline of self-reflection. Ask yourself, am I clinging to pride in this moment? Am I refusing to listen, to learn, or to change because I fear how it will make me appear? These questions, though uncomfortable, are the keys to unmasking your pride. Finally, remember that humility is not a sign of weakness, but of wisdom. It is the ability to see yourself clearly, to accept your flaws without shame, and to strive for better without the need for applause. Lay down the weight of pride and feel the lightness of humility. In doing so, you will find not only freedom but strength, not only peace but purpose. Pride binds, humility liberates. Choose liberation. The courage to be vulnerable. Vulnerability is often misunderstood as weakness, yet it is one of the greatest acts of courage you can display. To be vulnerable is to stand unguarded, to strip away the armor of ego, and to present your authentic self to the world. It requires a strength that few are willing to summon, for it demands that you face the fear of judgment, rejection, and failure head-on. But in embracing vulnerability, you unlock a path to genuine humility and profound inner peace. Ego despises vulnerability. It clings to the facade of perfection, convincing you that to reveal your imperfections is to risk losing respect or influence. Ego insists that you must never show doubt, pain, or weakness, as if these human truths are flaws to be hidden. Yet, this denial of vulnerability is what weakens you. It isolates you behind a wall of pretense and prevents others from seeing the real you. It traps you in a cycle of exhausting performance, a cycle that erodes your sense of self over time. Consider how vulnerability transforms leadership. A leader who admits they do not have all the answers inspires trust and collaboration. Their willingness to show humanity makes them approachable and relatable. Such leaders do not seek to dominate but to empower, and in doing so they build stronger teams and communities. Humility in leadership begins with the courage to be vulnerable. Vulnerability also frees you from the fear of failure. When you accept that imperfection is a natural part of life, you no longer need to fear falling short. You can take risks, try new things, and step outside your comfort zone, knowing that mistakes are not a reflection of your worth but an opportunity to learn. Ego shackles you to a fear of failure, but humility liberates you to embrace it as a stepping stone. To cultivate vulnerability, start by being honest with yourself. Acknowledge your fears, your insecurities, and your limitations without judgment. Then, extend this honesty to others. Share your challenges, ask for help when you need it, and admit when you do not have all the answers. These actions, though daunting, will strengthen you in ways that ego cannot. Remember, vulnerability is not about exposing yourself to harm or laying bare every aspect of your life. It is about being authentic, about showing up as you truly are without pretense or fear. In vulnerability, you find connection. In connection, you find strength, and in strength, you find the path to genuine humility. The world does not need your perfection, it needs your authenticity. Be courageous enough to offer it. The folly of seeking external validation. Ego thrives on the applause of others, feeding on their approval as if it were the only measure of worth. It whispers that your value is tied to recognition, that your success is hollow unless it is acknowledged, and that your happiness depends on the opinions of those around you. But this is folly, for external validation is a fleeting shadow, one that can never truly fill the depths of your soul. Consider how often you act not from a place of conviction but from a desire to be seen, liked, or admired. You wear masks to fit in, say words that please rather than reflect your truth, and chase achievements not for their intrinsic value but for the applause they may bring. This is the ego's game, and it is a game you cannot win. The applause fades, the admiration shifts, and the approval you seek is always just out of reach, leaving you chasing an endless horizon. True humility recognizes the futility of seeking validation from others. It understands that external approval is a fickle currency, one that fluctuates with the winds of opinion and circumstance. Humility shifts the focus inward, asking not, "What do they think of me?" but rather, "Am I living in accordance with my principles?" Ego resists this truth, for it fears being unseen, unheard, and unacknowledged. It equates humility with obscurity and assumes that without recognition, you are nothing. But humility knows better. It knows that greatness is not defined by how others perceive you, but by the quality of your character and the impact of your actions. The sun does not shine for applause, nor does the tree grow tall for admiration. They fulfill their purpose simply because it is their nature to do so. and so should you. Let go of the need for constant validation by focusing on intrinsic rewards. Find joy in the work itself, in the act of striving toward excellence, and in the quiet satisfaction of knowing you gave your best. Replace the question, will they approve, with the question, am I proud of what I've done? This shift in focus will liberate you from the chains of ego and align you with the path of humility. To further unmask your dependence on external validation, practice gratitude and self-affirmation. Instead of seeking praise from others, reflect on what you are grateful for within yourself. Acknowledge your strengths, your progress, and your efforts, not to inflate your ego but to cultivate self-respect. When you value yourself, you no longer need the world's approval to feel worthy. Remember, the opinions of others are beyond your control, but the integrity of your actions is entirely within your grasp. Seek not to impress, but to improve. Seek not to be admired, but to be honorable. True freedom lies not in being seen by all, but in being at peace with yourself. This is the path of genuine humility. Walk it with courage, and the need for validation will fade like a shadow in the light of your inner strength. The power of letting go. Ego is a master of attachment, clinging fiercely to possessions, status, opinions, and grudges. Tells you that these things define you, that without them you are diminished. But in truth, this attachment is a source of suffering. When you tether your identity to what you have or what you believe, you become a prisoner of your own desires and fears. Letting go is the antidote, a powerful act of liberation that leads to genuine humility and unshakable peace. Imagine holding a fistful of sand. The tighter you grip, the more the grains slip through your fingers. Such is the nature of attachment. The more you cling, the more you lose. Ego convinces you to hoard, to defend, and to control. But the reality is that life is impermanent. Everything you hold dear, every possession, achievement, or belief is subject to change. To deny this truth is to set yourself up for pain. To accept it is to embrace freedom. Letting go does not mean indifference or apathy. It is not about giving up on your dreams, relationships, or principles. Rather, it is about releasing the need to control outcomes, to prove yourself, or to cling to what no longer serves you. It is the understanding that you are not your possessions, your titles, or your opinions. You are something deeper, something that cannot be diminished by loss or change. Consider the attachments that ego fosters. It clings to material wealth, equating it with success and security. Yet wealth is fleeting. It can be gained and lost in an instant. True humility recognizes that material possessions are tools, not trophies, and that their value lies in how they are used, not in how they are displayed. By letting go of your attachment to wealth, you free yourself from its power over you. Ego also clings to opinions and beliefs, often turning them into unyielding dogmas. It resists the idea of being wrong, for to admit error feels like a threat to your identity. But humility understands that growth requires flexibility, that the willingness to change your mind is a sign of strength, not weakness. Letting go of rigid thinking opens the door to wisdom and understanding. Perhaps the most toxic attachment of all is to resentment. Ego feeds on grudges, using them to justify anger and self-righteousness. But holding on to resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to suffer. It weighs you down, clouds your judgment, and chains you to the past. Humility teaches forgiveness, not for the sake of others, but for your own liberation. To let go of resentment is to reclaim your peace. Letting go requires practice and patience. Start small. Examine the things you cling to most fiercely and ask yourself, why am I holding on to this? What fear or desire is driving this attachment? Then take a step toward release. If it is a material possession, consider giving it away. If it is an opinion, open yourself to new perspectives. If it is a grudge, seek forgiveness or simply decide to move forward. Remember, letting go is not a single act but a way of being. It is the practice of living lightly, of holding the world with open hands rather than a clenched fist. When you let go, you create space for what truly matters, for joy, for connection, and for inner peace. Humility is born in the act of letting go. It is the recognition that you do not need to possess, control, or prove anything to be whole. It is the freedom to live authentically, unburdened by the weight of ego's attachments. Let go, and you will find that what remains is not emptiness but abundance. In releasing the grip of ego, you discover the boundless strength of the self. The discipline of silence. In a world that celebrates noise and constant expression, the discipline of silence is a forgotten art. Ego thrives in noise, seeking every opportunity to speak, to prove, to assert. It fears the stillness of silence, for silence leaves no room for self-aggrandizement. Yet it is in silence that humility takes root. It is in silence that wisdom is cultivated, for only in the absence of noise can we truly hear the voice of reason, the whisper of truth, and the guidance of our inner compass. Silence is not merely the absence of words, it is the presence of self-awareness. It is the pause before reacting, the space in which you reflect on your thoughts, motives, and intentions. Ego resists this pause, urging you to fill the silence with immediate responses, declarations, or defenses. But humility understands the power of restraint. It knows that silence is not weakness, it is strength under control. Consider the role of silence in conflict. Ego urges you to speak quickly and loudly, to defend your pride and prove your superiority. But such reactions often escalate tensions, leading to misunderstandings and regret. Humility, however, embraces silence as a tool for de-escalation. It allows you to listen fully, to understand the other person's perspective, and to respond thoughtfully rather than impulsively. In silence you find clarity, in clarity you find the path to resolution. Silence is also a space for learning. When you speak, you are repeating what you already know. When you listen, you have the opportunity to learn something new. Ego seeks to dominate conversations, to showcase its knowledge and assert its opinions. But humility listens with an open mind and heart, valuing the insights of others over the need to be right. In silence, you become a student of life, and in being a student, you grow. The discipline of silence extends to your inner dialogue as well. Ego fills your mind with noise, with endless comparisons, judgments, and doubts. It distracts you from the present moment, pulling you into a spiral of overthinking. Humility quiets this inner noise. It teaches you to observe your thoughts without attachment, to let go of what does not serve you, and to find peace in the stillness of your mind. Practicing silence does not mean avoiding speech altogether. Words have power, and they should be used wisely. Silence is about intentionality, about speaking only when your words are necessary, truthful, and kind. Before you speak, ask yourself, does this need to be said? Does it contribute to understanding or harmony? If the answer is no, choose silence. In this restraint, you demonstrate humility and wisdom. Silence is also a gateway to self-reflection. In moments of stillness, you can examine your motives, question your assumptions, and reconnect with your values. It is in these quiet moments that you confront your ego, unmasking its fears and desires. Silence is not an escape, but an encounter, a meeting with your truest self. Embracing the discipline of silence requires practice. Begin with small steps. Set aside moments each day to simply be silent, whether through meditation, a walk in nature, or quiet contemplation. In conversations, practice listening more than speaking. Resist the urge to interrupt, to dominate, or to fill the silence. Observe how this shift transforms your interactions and your inner state. In silence, you discover the depth of humility. You learn that you do not need to prove your worth through words, that your presence and character speak louder than any declaration. Silence teaches you patience, perspective, and peace. It is not the absence of action, but the foundation of intentional action. The discipline of silence is a powerful tool in the journey to unmask the ego. In its stillness, you find clarity. In its restraint, you find strength. And in its practice, you find the freedom to live with its humility, wisdom, and purpose. Let silence be your ally, a reminder that the truest power often lies not in what is said, but in what is left unsaid. The strength in accepting criticism. Criticism often stings because it touches on vulnerabilities you try to hide. The ego prefers a polished image, one free of flaws or faults. But humility understands that imperfection is a part of being human. To accept criticism is to acknowledge that you are a work in progress, that you do not have all the answers, and that there is always room to improve. This acknowledgement is not a sign of failure, it is a sign of courage. Consider how accepting criticism deepens relationships. When you respond to feedback with openness rather than defensiveness, you signal to others that you value their perspective. This fosters trust and mutual respect. It creates an environment where constructive dialogue can thrive, allowing you and those around you to grow together. Ego resists this, for it fears vulnerability. But humility embraces it, knowing that relationships built on honesty are far stronger than those built on pretense. Criticism is also a mirror, reflecting not only your actions but the values and priorities of the one offering it. Humility teaches you to listen with discernment, separating helpful feedback from mere opinion. Not all criticism is valid, but even in invalid criticism, there can be insight. Perhaps it reveals a misunderstanding that needs to be addressed or highlights a perception you had not considered. The wise remain open, sifting through criticism with patience and thoughtfulness. To accept criticism effectively, cultivate curiosity over defensiveness. When criticized, ask questions. Seek clarification and understanding. What specific actions or behaviors led to this feedback? How might you improve or approach the situation differently in the future? By approaching criticism as a learning opportunity rather than a personal attack, you disarm your ego and empower your growth. Ego often magnifies criticism, making it feel larger and more personal than it truly is. To counter this, practice perspective. Remind yourself that criticism is not a reflection of your worth, but a reflection of someone's perception. It is a single viewpoint, not an ultimate truth. Humility helps you see criticism as a tool for refinement, not as a verdict on your character. Embracing criticism requires inner resilience. Build this resilience by developing a strong sense of self-worth that is independent of external opinions. When you know your values, intentions, and efforts, you are less shaken by criticism. You can evaluate it objectively, accepting what is helpful and discarding what is not. This balance is the hallmark of humility. Criticism, when accepted with grace, is one of the greatest teachers. It shines a light on blind spots, challenges complacency, and pushes you toward greater awareness and excellence. It teaches you to separate your ego from your essence, reminding you that your value lies not in perfection, but in your willingness to grow. The strength to accept criticism lies in humility. It is the ability to hear feedback without losing sight of your worth, to learn without feeling diminished, and to grow without resentment. Criticism may not always be easy to hear, but it is a doorway to wisdom and transformation. You walk through it with courage, and you will emerge stronger, wiser, and freer from the shackles of ego. The liberation of living without comparison. Comparison is the thief of joy and the fuel of ego. The ego is never content to simply be. It must measure itself against others, constantly asking, am I better or worse? Richer or poorer? More admired or overlooked? This incessant comparison traps you in a cycle of envy, pride, and dissatisfaction, pulling you further from humility and inner peace. To free yourself from this cycle is to embrace true liberation, to live not in comparison to others, but in alignment with your own values and growth. Ego thrives on comparison because it craves superiority. It seeks to prove its worth by being better than someone else. When you achieve something, the ego does not rest in satisfaction. It immediately seeks a benchmark, someone to outshine or impress. This pursuit is endless and exhausting, for no matter how far you climb, there will always be someone higher. Ego's game has no finish line. But ego's trap does not stop at superiority. It also finds ways to make you feel inferior. When others succeed, ego whispers that their success diminishes you. It sows seeds of jealousy and resentment. making you focus on what you lack rather than what you have. This is the dark side of comparison, one that corrodes gratitude and blinds you to your own blessings. Humility offers a different path. It understands that comparison is not only unnecessary but harmful. Your worth is not determined by how you measure up to others, but by the quality of your character and the effort you put into your life. Humility reminds you that everyone walks their own path, shaped by unique circumstances, challenges, and choices. To compare your journey to someone else's is to compare two different worlds, an exercise as meaningless as it is destructive. To break free from comparison, shift your focus inward. Instead of asking, "How do I measure up?" ask, "How am I growing?" Focus on your own progress, on becoming a better version of yourself rather than a better version of someone else. This shift is not only liberating but empowering, for it places your happiness and fulfillment entirely within your control. Recognize that the success of others is not a threat but an inspiration. When you see someone achieve something remarkable, let it motivate you rather than discourage you. Celebrate their accomplishments genuinely, understanding that their light does not dim your own. The ego struggles with this, but humility sees abundance where the ego sees scarcity. There is enough success, joy, and fulfillment to go around. Living without comparison also requires gratitude. When you focus on what you have rather than what you lack, you cultivate contentment. Gratitude shifts your perspective from scarcity to abundance, reminding you that your life is full of gifts and opportunities. By appreciating your own journey, you become less concerned with how it stacks up against others. Another key to escaping the trap of comparison is self-awareness. Pay attention to the situations that trigger your ego's need to compare. Is it social media, where curated lives create illusions of perfection? Is it competitive environments where worth seems tied to performance? Recognize these triggers and consciously choose a different response. Instead of feeding the comparison, remind yourself of your own values, goals, and progress. Letting go of comparison does not mean ignoring the achievements of others or failing to set high standards for yourself. It means finding your standards within, based on your own principles and aspirations. It means striving for excellence without measuring your worth against someone else's yardstick. When you live without comparison, you discover a profound freedom. You are no longer tethered to the highs and lows of external validation. Your joy becomes steady, rooted in your own growth and purpose. Your humility deepens, for you no longer see life as a competition, but as a shared journey. Remember, comparison belongs to the ego, but peace belongs to humility. The moment you stop measuring yourself against others, you reclaim your power. You step into a life of authenticity and self-respect, a life where your worth is defined not by where you stand relative to others, but by how faithfully you walk your own path. This is the liberation that humility brings. Walk this path, and comparison will lose its hold on you, leaving you free to live with joy, purpose, and peace. The art of embracing vulnerability. Ego thrives on strength and invulnerability. It constructs walls to shield itself from pain, from failure, and from the possibility of being exposed. It fears vulnerability, for it equates vulnerability with weakness, fragility, and defeat. But this belief is a fallacy. True strength lies not in the armor we wear, but in the courage to show our authentic selves, to embrace our imperfections, and to live with openness. Humility understands that vulnerability is not a burden, but a powerful, liberating force that connects us to others and to our own truth. To be vulnerable is to strip away the masks of perfection that the ego wears so proudly. It is to expose your fears, your doubts, and your flaws, not as signs of weakness, but as parts of the human experience. The ego hides from these things, afraid that they will diminish its image or cause others to see it as inferior. But humility knows that true connection arises when we are honest about our struggles, our shortcomings, and our emotions. Vulnerability is not weakness. It is an act of strength, for it requires tremendous courage to allow yourself to be seen as you are, without pretense or facade. It is the willingness to open your heart, to speak your truth, and to ask for help when needed. The ego, ever fearful of appearing weak, resists this openness, but humility understands that vulnerability is the path to authenticity and deeper connections with others. Consider the power of vulnerability in relationships. When you allow yourself to be vulnerable with others, you create a space of trust and empathy. You invite others to do the same, breaking down barriers and fostering understanding. Vulnerability allows you to share your humanity, to connect with others on a deeper level, and to form bonds that are rooted in mutual respect and compassion. The ego, in contrast, keeps relationships superficial, focused on appearances and status. Humility, however, nurtures relationships that are grounded in honesty and emotional intimacy. Vulnerability also allows for growth. When you acknowledge your weaknesses and fears, you open the door to improvement. Ego resists this, preferring to deny or cover up its flaws, but humility knows that growth begins with self-awareness. By embracing vulnerability, you give yourself the opportunity to learn, to change, and to evolve. You give yourself permission to fail without fear of condemnation, for you understand that failure is not an end but a step toward mastery. To embrace vulnerability, you must first release the need for approval. Ego craves validation and approval from others, believing that without it you are unworthy. But humility understands that your worth is not dependent on others' opinions. When you are vulnerable, you allow yourself to be fully present without seeking validation or protection. You are no longer concerned with how others perceive you, for you know that your value lies in your character, not in your image. Vulnerability also requires acceptance of your imperfections. The ego clings to an idealized version of who you should be, striving for perfection in every aspect of life. Humility, however, understands that perfection is an illusion. It accepts that you are not defined by your flaws, but by how you handle them. To be vulnerable is to accept yourself fully, to embrace your imperfections as part of your unique journey. Start small in embracing vulnerability. Speak openly about your feelings, your struggles, and your fears. Share your dreams and your doubts, not for validation but to invite others into your world. Practice asking for help when you need it, not out of weakness but as an expression of trust and strength. When you allow yourself to be vulnerable, you invite others to do the same, creating a culture of authenticity and mutual respect. Understand that vulnerability is not a one-time act but a way of life. It is the daily practice of showing up as your true self, without pretense, without masks, and without fear. In doing so, you free yourself from the constraints of ego, stepping into a life of deeper connection, personal growth, and true peace. The ego fears vulnerability because it fears exposure. It fears being seen in its imperfection. But humility knows that the greatest strength comes from being fully seen, fully known, and fully accepted for who you are. Embrace vulnerability, and you will discover that it is not a sign of weakness, but a wellspring of power, connection, and growth. In vulnerability, you find the freedom to be truly alive, to be truly yourself. The power of acceptance. Acceptance is the cornerstone of inner peace and the antidote to the constant striving of the ego. The ego is never content. It is always seeking to change, control, or resist the world around it. It demands that reality conform to its desires, its expectations, and its judgments. When things do not go as the ego wishes, it struggles, resists, and suffers, yet it is in the practice of acceptance that true freedom is found. Acceptance is not resignation or passivity, but a conscious choice to align with what is, to meet life on its terms, not your own. Humility understands that the path to peace lies in embracing the present moment as it is, without judgment or attachment to outcomes. The ego is constantly in conflict with reality. It wants life to be a certain way, and when things do not align with its expectations, it feels frustrated, angry, or disappointed. This resistance to what is causes suffering. Humility, however, teaches us to accept the present moment fully, to acknowledge what is without resistance. This does not mean passively accepting injustice or neglecting action when needed. Rather, it is about accepting what is within your control and releasing what is not. Acceptance begins with self-awareness. Ego often resists the parts of yourself that you do not like, hiding them or pretending they do not exist. It clings to an image of who you think you should be, rejecting the person you actually are. Humility, however, accepts all aspects of you, the strengths, the weaknesses, the successes, and the failures. It sees you as a whole being, not defined by any one moment, but by the totality of your experiences. To accept yourself is to recognize your worth in all your imperfections and to honor the journey that has brought you to where you are. When you practice acceptance, you also practice gratitude. The ego is rarely grateful for the present moment. It is always looking ahead, searching for something better, something more. But humility teaches you to find peace in what you have now, to appreciate the beauty of the present. When you accept life as it is, you open the door to gratitude, for you realize that even in moments of hardship, there is something to be thankful for, lessons to be learned, strengths to be discovered, and wisdom to be gained. The practice of acceptance does not mean you passively allow harmful situations to persist. It means you accept reality as it is, but you take responsibility for how you respond. It is about recognizing what you cannot control and focusing your energy on what you can, your actions, your mindset, and your attitude. So by accepting the things you cannot change, you free yourself from frustration and suffering, allowing you to direct your energy toward creating positive change where it is possible. To cultivate acceptance, start by examining your thoughts and reactions. When you feel frustration, anger, or resistance, pause and ask yourself, what am I resisting? Is this something I can control, or is it beyond my power? If it is beyond your power, practice releasing it. If it is within your control, focus your energy on what you can change. Over time, this practice of acceptance will become second nature, and you will find that your life is filled with more peace, more flow, and more joy. The power of acceptance lies in its ability to transform your relationship with reality. When you accept life on its terms, you stop fighting against it. You cease to be at war with the world, and in doing so, you end the internal battle that causes suffering. Acceptance is not passive, it is active and transformative. It is the recognition that life will unfold as it will, and your task is not to control it, but to meet it with wisdom, humility, and grace. In acceptance, you find the freedom to be at peace with yourself and the world around you. You stop chasing after what you cannot have, and instead you embrace what you do have. You stop resisting the flow of life, and instead you flow with it. This is the power of acceptance. It is the path to inner peace, to freedom, and to living a life that is grounded in humility and understanding. When you accept what is, you are no longer bound by ego's constant demands. You are free to live fully, with presence, with grace, and with peace.